We are now joined by the Democratic candidate for North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mo Green. Mo, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so tell us, as superintendent, what is your one-line mission statement?
So that would be that we're going to achieve educational excellence if I'm elected as the next superintendent of public instruction. That means that we're going to use a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., intelligence plus character, that being the goal of true education, and combine it with a focus on excellence.
Let's talk about student performance. New numbers show 54% of students were proficient on state exams during the past school year. That is an improvement from the year before, but before the pandemic, it was 59% almost. What's your message to parents out there who are understandably growing impatient with what's been called the pandemic learning loss?
Yeah, so I would list a couple of things for parents who are concerned. One is that certainly we need to continue as educators to do everything possible to improve academic achievement. But that includes then being sure that we've got the level of resources to be able to do that. One of the things that I have lifted up throughout this campaign is that we are falling woefully short on the kind of resources necessary to really make the kind of dramatic improvements in our public schools. And so we've got to get those resources up, because once that happens, we'll be able to do things like lower class sizes, like pay our educators more, like bring in teaching assistants, the sorts of things that all will improve outcomes for our students.
All right, I want to follow up on that in just a second, because you say more resources. More resources come from state lawmakers. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Because in the meantime, from this week, news this week, those same state lawmakers I was talking about expanded opportunity scholarships to the tune of almost $500 million. These are vouchers that now even wealthy families can use to go to private or charter schools. But I know you disagree with this. I know a lot of folks disagree with this. But what do you say to families that say if public schools were doing better, then they wouldn't leave?
What I would say back to them is, number one, public schools would do better if the resources were provided to public schools. We find ourselves in North Carolina in 48th position compared to the rest of the nation with regards to funding. This is dramatic when you think about the national average. Is about $16,000 per student. We're at about $11,000. When you even compare us to Virginia and South Carolina, we're at $3,000 to $4,000 less than even those border states. So this is real money that would make a dramatic difference for our public schools. I would also say that it is, the requirement in our North Carolina Constitution for us to have, a public school system that I think can indeed provide the sound basic education that is required.
Okay, let's say everything you just said is 100% accurate and everybody agrees with it, everybody. What do you do about a Republican General Assembly that you need to get on the same page as you to get anything accomplished? You want more resources, you got to go through them. You want anything, you got to go through the Republican General Assembly. How do you plan to do that effectively? You can have all the best ideas in the world if you think, but if you don't get them on board, it's not going to happen.
The way that I operate, it's now a brand that started when I was superintendent of Guilford County Schools, but it is to listen, learn, and then lead, and it's called Mo Wants to Know. The way that I operate is to spend time with folks, listen to what their concerns are, try to bring people along on particular issues, and then put together a plan that everyone can buy into. I also believe that it's important to recognize that this is not a situation where I have to do this by myself. This is going to be an all-in sort of situation. There will be many and varied voices that can help us have conversations with the General Assembly that will hopefully lead them to a place where we can have positive outcomes for students. This also assumes, in your question, that we're going to have a General Assembly that is at least the same or substantially similar to what we have currently. That may or may not be the case as well.
What do we do about teacher turnover? We talk about it almost on a daily basis on our newscasts. Certainly more resources would help, but what else?
So I think we have to start there with more resources and more resources to allow for increased compensation for our educators, including our teachers. If we don't start there, then everything else really becomes an uphill battle. But let's assume that we do get that. In addition to that, I do think that we have to think about compensation-related activities like housing allowances or child care subsidies for our educators. I think we've got to think about how to get working conditions in a better place. And there are any number of things one can do to try to do that. And then finally, I do believe that we have to think about leadership. Leadership matters. I have, based on my experience, know that educators will come and stay in a particular school if the leadership is supportive of them and their work, is an effective leader, and can provide the kind of support necessary for them to do the work that they're called upon to do.
Crime up in schools in the last 5 years. How do you effectively tackle that?
So I think this is something that we have to think about on a number of different fronts. Includes, I'll lift up 4 areas very quickly. Recognizing that there are more than just these. But the 4 that I would lift up are, number 1, we do need to be sure that we have more mental health professionals working with our students. Our students are often going through lots of challenges, and we need to be sure that there are professionals that can work with them. Number 2, I do think we have to have effective relationships with law enforcement. And as an aside, I will note that when I was deputy superintendent of Charlotte Mecklenburg schools, we actually had our own law enforcement division that reported directly to me. So this was in addition to school resource officers that I worked with in both Charlotte Mecklenburg schools and in Guilford County schools. Third, I think we've got to think about how we harden our facilities so that it makes it more challenging for folks to get into our facilities with things like double entries and metal wands, etc., things of that nature. And then finally, character development. This is, I think, critically important for our young folks to understand how to comport themselves, how to be in relationship with each other, even when they're in disagreement with each other.
Speaking of disagreement, Republicans claim a culture war is unfolding in our classrooms. Talk about gender studies, critical race theory. Understanding there's not going to be agreement among everybody, and that you probably don't agree with them on that. How do we find some respectable common ground so that this debate is not unfolding in our classrooms every single year?
I do think that we have to find ways to recognize the concerns that families and parents may have around some of these issues, be willing to listen to those concerns, recognize if we can take down the temperature and listen to each other. Oftentimes, I think we'll find that we're not actually all that far apart from each other. I take, for example, the issues around DEI as an example. Oftentimes, folks lift up those as concerns, recognizing that diversity ought to be seen as a strength, and I think many of our educators see that. Equity is something that we practice every day. As a parent, as community members, you don't provide, as educators, you don't provide the same level of resources for every person equally because they need different things to be successful. And an inclusion is something that we ought to be practicing, where we be sure that every student who comes to us feels safe and welcome in our school. So I think it's one of these things where oftentimes we can get caught up in the headlines and in the high activity volume of comments and not really understand that if we can just spend some time listening to each other, perhaps we can begin to understand how, maybe we're not all that far apart from each other, and how then we can move things forward in a way that would be beneficial for our students.
what do you say to state lawmakers and others who want to say in the curriculum of a school, knowing that you're an educator and teachers are educators and they're in the classroom, who knows best?
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of folk who ought to be involved in developing our curriculum. So, certainly our teachers know a lot. They've been trained in this regard, but I am not one that suggests that you should just dismiss everybody else. Our lawmakers, our State Board of Education, this position ought to also have input on what ultimately shows up in our classrooms. Now, I think that there has to be a level of respect given to the educators because, again, they have been the ones who have gotten the actual training and know a lot about what ultimately works in educating students.
Democratic candidate for North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mo Green. Mo, thanks for coming on. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. More Flashpoint after this. Mo, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. Come back anytime, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take care.